Hey y'all, welcome back to the Greg Brownville Dimension. Last July, I went down to Mexico City with a small crew from Southwest Review. That's the literary magazine that I edit. And if you haven't already subscribed to that, I highly recommend that you do so. We're doing a lot of cool things at Southwest Review, and we've expanded our operations and now have a multimedia outlet called New Pony. And actually, the trip to Mexico City was really more of a New Pony trip because what we were there to do is to record interviews for a podcast about a Mexican poet named Sergio Loo and a Mexican rock star named Rita Guerrero, who was the lead singer of a band called Santa Sabina. And it's a great story. I wanted to share it with you here. It was first released as part of a music issue of Southwest Review, this issue here. And the podcast was first made available through a QR code inside the magazine. But now it's available for the entire world, and I wanted to make you aware of it by posting it here. It's a great story about Rita and Sergio. I hope you enjoy. The rest of this episode will be audio only. I just wanted to come in here and introduce it, let you know what it was about. Hope y'all enjoy. It's called A Crack in the Pavement.
Music starts crossing borders, and it's like this confirmation that music gets to places you don't fucking know about. It's like this little, like the plant that's growing in the crack of a pavement. It's like there, the seed is there and it is gonna grow.
What you're about to hear is the story of a rock star who was half poet and a poet who was half rock star. Set in Mexico City, it's the story of Rita Guerrero and Sergio Loo, each of whom embodied the spirit of a generation. Though Rita and Sergio never even met, their histories are now intertwined in fascinating ways that tell us a lot about our own cultural moment and how we got here. In this podcast, we'll journey to Mexico to find out how the connection between Rita and Sergio came to be. In the oldest capital city in the Americas, we'll revisit the analog rock and roll 1990s and move forward into the digitized present. We'll wander dark streets among music and mezcal high in the volcanic Mexican mountains and explore the underground scenes where two geniuses of song made their art, their friendships, and their enduring reputations. Like I said, it's a story about Rita and Sergio, but it's also about the secret, unpredictable lives and legacies of songs and poems. For Southwest Review and New Pony, I'm Greg Brownville. This is our second sound story, A Crack in the Pavement.
The band first played as part of a play, of a theater play.
That's Alex Otaola, former lead guitarist of Santa Sabina, the rock band in which Rita became famous as an iconic lead singer.
And in that theater play, Rita acted. And she was like the lead singer for some songs the band played. And then when that play ended, like they were like, hey, that was cool, right? We should start a band. And that was like the thing that sent Santa Sabina rolling. So Santa Sabina had these 5 weirdos in it who wrote music together.
As a rock star from the late 80s all through the 90s and into the new millennium, Rita was known for her goth stage presence. Here's how Alex remembers that version of Rita.
This vampire-y kind of singer and figure, and like this very sexy woman.
Alex explains that when Rita hit the scene, it was very unusual for a woman to front a rock band.
Rita was one of the first lead singers in major lead singer, along with Cecile Toussaint, Kenny, the Baby Batis. There were obviously Betsy Pecanis. There were lead singers before her, but she was one of the first to have like this very special and different style.
Rita had a remarkable capacity to be completely present in both body and mind whenever she was working on something.
She was like very intense in the sense that whatever she did, whether it was going up on stage, writing a lyric, working on the music, the plot stage for a particular show, you realize how focused and how that was the top priority in the moment for her. For example, I think that if she had like a cell phone, she would be like someone like, if she's focused on doing something, it's like, no, man, like this is off. She throws it. And then later she realized, okay, what's coming up next? So she was like one of the most focused and intense persons I've ever worked with.
In the mid-90s, Santa Sabina very publicly supported the Zapatistas, a far-left political group in Chiapas, the southernmost Mexican state. When I asked Alex to articulate his understanding of the Zapatistas and their movement, he made a valiant attempt to summarize the complex history.
The Zapatistas started on 94, 1st of January. It was supposedly an army who rose on 1st January of 94 because Chiapas, south communities near the southern border of Mexico, it's some of the poorer places. And when money or people with money enter rural spaces, most of the times it's to impose a new way of doing stuff instead of like becoming one with the people who are already there. And it was like the poor people in Mexico, their lands were being like taken.
I was struck by Alex's genuine humility about his knowledge of the Zapatistas.
It's good that you can edit this because maybe I'm not like the best one to like do the Zapatista, how do you say? Because I wouldn't want to like state something that when you like research it, it was like, no way.
As Alex recounted the story of how artists in Mexico City engaged with the Zapatista movement, it became clear that the spiritual and aesthetic ramifications of this engagement were more important than the complicated particulars of the political history.
When the Zapatista thing happened, it like turned things around because suddenly, and I think this is like the last time this has happened in Mexican history, there was like this sense of like possible change. The rock groups, the painters, the actors, writers, like it turned everything up. It was almost like poetic. It's like, this can't be happening. Everyone was for it.
We can see this emphasis on aesthetics in the way Santa Sabina's music responded to the Zapatista movement, namely by the refusal to reduce art to mere propaganda.
Rita was very clear about, if this is a song about Zapatistas, it's not gonna talk about Chiapas and, the lyric is not gonna say the word Zapatistas, and we're not gonna say Chiapas in the lyric, because she felt that in order to convey the way the Zapatistas were doing their stuff, she had to be also, she had to say it in a way that someone who understood would know she's talking about Zapatistas. But it's something that it's open, and if you read that lyric, you wouldn't necessarily do the association.
The band's poetic approach was very much in keeping with certain features of the larger movement.
The most visible figure was Subcomandante Marcos. You didn't know who he was. It was obvious that he wasn't one of from the communities. He was one probably from here, from the city, but the way he spoke about what the Zapatistas were trying to achieve, that was very appealing to a lot of people because he was also like a poet. His communication was more like he wrote poems. He became like this, how do you say it? Like this figure of rebellion. Rebellion implying justice.
That last comment about justice reveals an important layer. The focus on aesthetics did not mean that the musicians were politically or morally insincere. It's interesting that Guerrero, Rita's surname, means warrior. Certainly, the opportunity to do something in the name of justice meant a great deal to her and to the other members of Santa Sabina. They were among a significant number of musicians who organized music festivals to boost the Zapatista movement.
We were like a big part of the festivals that gathered bands and asked the public for donations, beans, rice, or a kilo of anything you'd want to send to the communities, and then take the stuff to the communities. At that point, big concerts in public spaces were forbidden. So they had to be done in like a university, in a stadium, in a football stadium, not the main one, like a practice stadium for the American football team or something.
These shows provided meaningful, memorable experiences for a generation of musicians and fans in Mexico's indie rock scene.
The people were there because, well, it was, okay, it's a gig, it's a festival, we're gonna like jump and shit. But all during the festival, there were like, we devised radio X. Most radios in Mexico start with an X, blah, 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 X, blah, blah. And it was like radio XZLN. And it was like during the set changes between bands, the radio transmitted on the PA. And there were people like poets reading poetry, announcement being made. It was what was happening in the jungle was like talked about, and it was something that if the Zapatista wouldn't have happened, things would have been going like the way they were going before, like everyone like working for their own. In Mexico, we have a saying which is jalando agua para su molino, which is pulling water for your own bucket. But the Zapatista thing brought something that we can all become part of this. And it felt like this is something for the good, it's something that seeks justice.
This work was not a matter of virtue signaling. Santa Sabina followed through on their promise to deliver aid to the Zapatistas, and they didn't get somebody else to do the work for them. This part of the story helps explain why fans loved bands like Santa Sabina and personally trusted them.
This is something that was really amazing because after the festivals, there was like this caravan who took the money and all the like food or the stuff that was medicine and things that were sent to the communities. And I was on one of those trips to deliver the stuff, and like you did a bus ride all night, you arrived at some barn, you slept another while, and then it's like in the field and stuff, you see the peasants, there's people around you, and there's like this sense that later in the day, the Zapatistas are coming, and we're gonna hand over what we have. And okay, and you were like all day, like very like looking at the trees and the woods. Okay, where are they gonna come from? Am I gonna hear the horses arriving, or that kind of like vibe? And at some point in the evening, all the people who were around you, they have like this, it's like a bandana, but here in Mexico you call it paliacate, it's something like a person like has around his neck. And they have it and they turned it all around and they pull it over their nose. And there they were the Zapatistas. They were the people who were around you all day. And at that point, they did this, and that was the official moment that, okay, now we're an army. And it was something I will never forget.
When I talk about the trust that fans placed in Santa Sabina, part of what I mean is that listeners believed these musicians were authentic, that the stories that grew up around the band were neither mythology nor marketing. They were true.
And it's like at that point in history, that energy of the Zapatistas was bringing everything like together into focus, like the music scene, the theater scene, the writers. There were a lot of people who were against them. Probably most of them, like they were with the regime, because that year, on the 1st of January, it was when the TLC with Canada and the United States started, and on that same day, the Zapatistas started too. So there was like this thing going on with society, where you had to like decide if you're for it or you're not, or you're against it, and most of the creative people, I believe, were for it. I think the most important memory we all have from Santa Sabina is that the name Santa Sabina is Saint Sabina, and Sabina meaning Maria Sabina, which was like a witch, a priestess that healed people with mushrooms from Huautla. Huautla de Jimenez is the name. And in 2004 or 5, maybe, we were asked to play in Huautla. There was actually this person in the municipality that he wanted to take us there, but also in order for Huautla to recognize us as proper carriers of the name and the heritage of Maria Sabina. We received like this mushroom baptism from the daughter of Maria Sabina. And even though that sounds like, this is like a rural place, but even though this sounds low-key, too low-key, it's probably like the biggest thing to happen to us. Later, after the ceremony, you had like a chance to have a reading of the chorals. And this is special, because it's like someone who is like cooking like corn, grains of corn, heating grains of corn, and you enter his space, you ask him something, he shifts them around, watches them, and then he tells you the answer. So that was also part of the ceremony there. I had tripped before on acid and obviously marijuana and stuff, but this time is different because you are like in the country, in the field, and after Maria Apolonia is the name of the daughter. After she gives you the mushroom and stuff, you're left like in a barn. You have like a mat there in the barn, and you're there in the mat. And at some point, since it's like a night and it starts in the night and ends in sunrise, you decide to leave the barn and walk on the field. If it suits you, you stay in the barn, you stay there lying in the mat, and probably you go to sleep there. I felt it was like it's something that was happening in Huautla. which is not like going like somewhere which is like an hour from the city and doing mushrooms there in that woods. It was like something, some place that you felt like was holy, and you felt like, well, I felt like I had to like go outside and walk in order to like try to like soak up or maybe like grasp something from the vibe of the place, which is evidently so special after so many years, that you start to wander around, like feeling if the nature around you has something to say to you. That was sort of like the mental space. You start like wandering around, rambling. Well, actually, yeah, it was like my dad passed away like a year after I entered San Sabina in '95, and I asked at the corn. I asked how was my dad doing. I guess it was my way of asking if is he cool with what am I doing, with what I'm doing, and it felt like it was telling me like you're doing the right thing.
The fans feeling that their support of Santa Sabina made them part of something beautiful and important was echoed by a spirit of collaboration within the band. And this began with Rita's creative humility.
It sounds bad if I say she knew she couldn't do it by herself, but no one in Santa Sabina was the main composer, or no one had like the Santa Sabina like blue check ¿cómo se dice? In their possession. Santa Sabina was like the space and the energy between us. So so Rita knew that in order to come up with cool stuff, she needed a team. So she with us, she wasn't like a star or someone like do the stuff for me. It's like we're doing the stuff together, and that was, I think, what made the music of Santa Sabina so powerful, and that helped her become a powerful figure on stage, and that all set up what the public received. So that meant the music, the magic, and the responsibility, and the pride was shared.
That's so cool. Robert Frost said the following about writing poetry. Like a piece of ice on a hot stove, the poem must ride on its own melting. A poem may be worked over once it is in being, but may not be worried into being. Sounds like Santa Sabina had a similar idea about writing songs.
No one knew what a Santa Sabina song would sound like when we were starting it, which is different from a composer who comes in the rehearsal and shows you the music, and you realize, okay, that's the map, this is the part A, this is the chorus, here maybe we can have a solo, let's work on the arrangement, let's build that up. But with Santa Sabina, you started like jamming or something, or probably Rita had a text, okay, let's build something up. And you started working on stuff until it somehow clicked, and it was like, that's it. And that was maybe like the start of the song, and if the rehearsal ended, you left like, I left the first rehearsal saying, oh, I wonder what the chorus of that song is going to sound like. Because it was, I felt it was like sculpting in the dark.
Sculpting in the dark. That's a formulation I won't soon forget. It was as if the phrase performed its own meaning, by which I mean it was an example of the very magic he was talking about, only in conversation rather than in songwriting. One of Santa Sabina's fans was a young poet of Mexico City named Sergio Loo. Here's how Mariana Orantes, a Mexico City writer of Loo's generation, described him in a 2018 issue of Full Stop. Sergio Loo in Mexican poetry is that brilliant explosion forever fixed in the night sky of sex or disease. He has become, with bouquets of violets at his feet, the eternally young poet who ultimately takes on all the rock stars. In July of 2024, I traveled to Mexico City to record interviews for this sound story. And one of my conversations was with writer Jonathan Minila, a close friend of Sergio's.
¿Fue importante la música en tu amistad con Sergio? Justo pensaba en el camino.
Jonathan and I met up at a film studio owned by a friend of mine in a neighborhood called Coyoacán, and Jonathan came on foot. On the way, he said he had been listening to Love Will Tear Us Apart by Joy Division, one of Sergio's favorite songs. According to Jonathan, when Sergio was in his 20s, two of his favorite things to do were listening to rock music and walking endlessly around Mexico City, often at night.
Sergio writes a lot of Mexico City and the nightlife of Mexico City in some specific years, no?
There are many resonances and affinities between Rita Guerrero's life and Sergio Loo's. Sergio was a poet who alluded to rock and roll in his writing. Here's Jonathan on the subject.
I think we can make a soundtrack the books of Serge, because in all the books he makes a reference to different rock bands like Velvet Underground or Joy Division, etc. No?
Meanwhile, Rita was a songwriter who collaborated with poets and in her lyrics employed poetic techniques.
Rita, evidently, she liked to read. She liked, like, for example, like these like very dense movies, Tarkovsky, Stalker, Herzog, all that stuff. She loved it, and several of the songs, the lyrics were written by Rita and Adriana Diaz Enciso.
Adriana is a poet currently living in London. She and Rita were childhood friends in Mexico.
And they worked on the lyrics together. And it was the way the music like blossomed was tricky. I don't know how to call it, because maybe we, the band, were jamming on something, on some idea, and Rita would have like this small xylophone, and she would like bang on it the melodies, like searching like for something, like where to like come inside the music, or how to surf on top of the music or something. And when she had like the melody, she started to sing it, but she sang like notes, not actually like words. The melody, she started like tracing them, and then with Adriana they would work on, okay, this is the melody, how do we fit the words? It made the band develop a connection with writers and with poets. The lyrics by themselves, they were like this very cool stuff. One called Mirror, Espejo, which it's very cool, the effect, because the last syllable of the line is the first syllable of the next line, and so like the same note does like this mirror kind of effect.
One adjective that people in Mexico City apply to both Rita and Sergio is dark. And they were both interested in horror writing. According to Jonathan, Sergio's favorite movie was Nightmare on Elm Street. Sergio's book, Nightmare in Narvarte, alludes to Freddy Krueger. Mixing high and low culture is a hallmark of his aesthetic. Carolina Hernandez, a writer who lives in Barcelona, shared a memory of her close friendship with Sergio that reflects his interest in horror tropes. The memory centers on a term of endearment, a portmanteau, that Carolina and Sergio used in reference to each other.
We had a term to embrace each other, which was abrazombies. This is a word very characteristic of him. It is a game word of the word abrazo, is a hug, and zombies for the zeta inside two words, abrazombies.
It's not particularly surprising that Rita, Mexico City's favorite goth girl, also took an avid interest in horror.
Adriana had this horror literature workshop or something. And Rita was there, and it was open for everyone, or friends, or fans, or something to be there. So she, at some point, was part of book premieres, so to speak. For example, Jordi Soler, who is another writer who now lives in, I think, Barcelona. He also wrote lyrics for two songs from different albums from San Sabina, which were like, the poems were there. He wrote the poems, and on the poem that we worked on the music. When Jordi at some point released or premiered books, one could be like poetry book, another could be like prose. We, either Rita or me or both or someone from Santa, we would be like the musical part of the event.
In their 20s, Sergio and Rita both loved to party. Jonathan told me some stories about fun times with Sergio, but first he issued a disclaimer about how young they were. He seemed to be concerned that their behavior might seem churlish.
¿Podrías contarme algunos recuerdos?
Yes, I have a lot of memories, but maybe it's gonna be well, we were young, no, and we were living and parties. If you are reading the books of Sergio, a lot of that scenes that he narrates about in life, no, in life.
Jonathan went on to tell me about a night in 2010 in Barcelona when he and Sergio drank 5 bottles of wine and made Coca-Cola meatloaf together. At the time, he says, they thought it was quite the sophisticated dish. Sergio was in Barcelona because he had received a grant to study at La Universidad Pompeu Fabra. Carolina shared an amusing memory about Sergio's stint in Spain. Her account shows Sergio's much celebrated sense of humor and also his keen sense of being distinctly Mexican during his time abroad.
When he came to live here to Barcelona, 2010, I remember that he had to rent an apartment, a flat, and he stayed in one because he saw a pretty pure cactus, nopal, which here in Spain is called chumbera. And here in Spain do not eat the cactus. So when he saw it, he told his partner, I'm staying here because just know that I'm going to eat your cactus. Of course, the partner say, what? In that apartment, we made paellas, many meetings with friends, and he also lived through the cold weather that it is in November. And he told me, que pinche frío haces, like what fucking cold is it? And he put in Facebook, I think that now I understand why Spanish people do not take a bath. And everybody told him, no, please don't become Spanish.
Alex recalls young Rita as someone who loved the wildness of the rock star's life.
When I first entered Santa Sabina in '94, maybe she was a little more reckless. At that point, she would, like, after a gig, like, okay, let's go party, and we have to watch the sunrise, guys. Okay. For example, and or yeah, there was a piano. She had a piano in her place, so I always felt like when we were like late at night there and we were banging on the piano, I always was like, man, what are the neighbors gonna? What are they feel? I think they don't like Rita that much.
Up to this point, I've been noting some of the happier and more lighthearted resonances between Rita's story and Sergio's. But there is one deeply sad connection that we haven't yet confronted in this podcast. In 2010, Rita was diagnosed with breast cancer. She died the following year at the age of 46. During that same year, 2011, Sergio was diagnosed with leg cancer. He died in 2014 at the age of 31. Alex talked about the year before Rita's death.
The people close to her like had a year when she sent the mail telling us the bad news. Like during that year, like you saw Rita, you still hang out with her at some point, and you like. I think it was different for the people who knew she was sick, because you start like realizing, okay, we're spending time together, which suddenly feels more valuable than if we didn't have this situation happening. So you started to treasure and realize that it was probably the last moments you were going to share with Rita. But I think for the audience and the people who were fans, it must have been like something really quick, because they heard the news, I believe, in November 2010. The concert was done in December, and 2 months later she died. It was, I tell you, like a farewell, the concert. And it was great that she had a chance to feel that, because probably for most of us it's not gonna happen. It's like we're gonna like leave the stage and people are gonna remember us, and okay, that's the usual way. But I think it was special for her to realize that I'm leaving all this love behind. Lots of musicians who had been part of Rita's history or Rita's life were there, and at the end of everything else, we played again as Santa Sabina. We didn't know if she was going to be able to do it.
That's why Santa Sabina was not actually on the bill for that concert.
We didn't want people to expect we were going to do it and for Rita to feel too bad. But it was great because it turned out like a tribute or a homage to someone while she's still here.
Have you ever thought about that there's a kind of rhyme between that moment and the one when y'all were playing the concert to raise money for the Zapatistas? That Rita had worked to raise money through music to help these people, and now y'all were playing to raise money to help her.
It's almost like the first time I think about it that way, but yeah. No, yeah, totally. But when you're doing the thing for the Zapatistas, when you're playing, or it becomes like something like on intocable, untouchable, unreachable, is vapid. I don't know how to say it. It's like air. You're doing something and hoping it will reach eventually the people you want that energy to reach. But with Rita, it was there. It was she came on stage and everyone was letting her know how special she was. So the concert, it raised money, but eventually, I don't think that the main issue was the money, because it could have been solved in different ways. But I think the most important was for Rita to feel loved, and to like all the work she had put up, including that you mentioned, all of that, and the musical work and all of it. It's like she came on stage, like to for everyone to let her know you did the right thing.
I couldn't help but hear an echo of Alex's own memorable moment in Huautla, whereas he had slipped out of a barn, wandered the country night, and heard or felt a voice telling him, "You're doing the right thing." Rita walked onto a stage and felt her fans delivering the exact same message to her, this singer named after a healer. Rita, a beloved, still young woman who unfortunately could not be healed. I asked Alex what he thought Rita's loss meant to people who loved her but didn't know her personally. I was thinking of Sergio.
People who suddenly someone as special as Rita disappears, it's like the possibility of special things to happen, or for her to do more special things. It was like she was someone who her artistic output was always amazing, and I think it's sad when you realize that the future won't have those amazing things that sprang from her anymore.
In addition to the sadness, there were practical concerns about money and healthcare.
In Mexico, musicians have it like very hard. For most of the musicians, music is rarely the only stuff that you can depend on, or that you will pay your bills. With her passing, it was as lots of people were like, damn, how can someone that was famous and her music reached people and stuff didn't have like the financial way to look after herself? That was also something that was talked about when it happened, that musicians don't have like social security, don't have like lots of stuff that when you're sick or ill or something, it's like, man. And that, I think, was probably her passing made a lot of people realize that not only musicians, creative people, especially in Latin America and places like Mexico, are on their own.
When I asked Jonathan about Sergio's losing battle against cancer, he talked less about practical matters than about spiritual and emotional ones. I found his response incredibly profound. I'll translate it into English.
Y ya no, perdón, voy a cambiar, y ya no puede, digamos, ahorita daba el ejemplo de que él era muy...
Sergio went through a breakup with Mexico City. Before his illness, he was used to walking a lot, just walking everywhere all the time, especially at night. And when he came back from Barcelona, the reason he came back is that he had cancer. And once he was here again, he could no longer keep up his custom of going on those long walks. That's how the breakup happened. Actually, in his book, Guia Roji, you get these references to the routes he would walk before he was sick. There's one text called "You Are Here." The image is of a physical map that tells you, okay, this is where you are right now. This is where you're starting from as you begin your walk. I feel like Sergio had this attachment to Mexico City and the nightlife. And the breakup was painful because he could no longer enjoy the relationship he'd had in the past with the city, the nightlife, and the people he would encounter. And it's funny, no, how the cancer that he had, it started in a leg. So it's quite interesting that an avid walker would come down with leg cancer. Jonathan and I also talked about the image of the leg as a symbol of youth, linked with motion, with dancing, with the body electric. And Jonathan said something poignant. He said, "When I think about it now, especially in that light, I really miss my 20s, because back then, death felt so far away from us. I mean, it was right there, but it felt so far away." Sergio, going through his illness and dying young, he retained his youth. He's eternally young, whereas the rest of us, of course, kept moving on. Our relationships started changing. Some people started having children, but not him. He just remained where he was. The disease, in some ways, obviously, it hinders you. It doesn't let you move. But then again, for Sergio, it allowed him to remain on the route, even if that meant a trip within his own body. Here, Jonathan talked about Sergio's book, Operation on a Malignant Body, which imagines bones and other parts of the body as streets or paths that Sergio traverses. In this metaphor, the body becomes the city, and the cancer is the darkness, the horror, alleyways of the Gothic to which Sergio had always been attracted. As Jonathan put it, even though Sergio was bound to a bed, he remained the walker he had always been. Sergio's forced relinquishment of his cherished perambulatory habit in favor of an internal journey helps me understand a memory that Carolina shared with me about the day when Sergio left Barcelona to return to Mexico City, going back home to die.
He left all his clothes behind to take the books with him. I went to take him to the airport, and the suitcases were so heavy, but the taxi is so expensive, and we take a bus. And I remember that it was a very heavy trip.
Occasionally, Sergio couldn't stop himself from quitting his sickbed. He would go out and revisit the streets of his beloved Mexico. One such occasion, not surprisingly, was a big literary festival called Poesía por Primavera, or Poetry for Spring. Sergio showed up, and he walked up to Jonathan. Sergio was holding a cane and looking quite pale. He was also a bit woozy from all the medications he was taking, but his sense of humor was intact, and he said to Jonathan, "Well, you know, man, I always did want to be a rock star. I kind of look like your typical drugged-up rock singer today, don't I?" And Jonathan agreed that he did. When Jonathan remembers Sergio, he does often think of him out and about with friends, but he also remembers very meaningful moments between just the two of them. Once, Jonathan was going through a breakup, a really rough one. And not only was there the pain of parting with a lover, actually his ex, he said, had absconded with all his furniture, and even worse, with his computer, which had all his stories on it. So Jonathan was heartbroken on multiple levels. All he had left was a mat to sleep on and some teacups, and Sergio came over. As always, even before the furniture had been stolen, Sergio sat on the floor with his legs crossed. And he said, "Dude, Jonathan, you are chaos. You really are. But you know what? It's all good. You're chaos, life's chaos, everything's chaos. But you are creatively chaotic." And Jonathan felt better. With some people, Jonathan said, you felt this pressure to hide what you were going through, who you were, what you were feeling, but never with Sergio. The dual commitment to large gatherings like literary festivals and to meaningful one-on-one time with friends, that's something that Sergio had in common with Rita. By way of example, here's a story that would have pleased Maria Sabina, the famous healer from whom Rita's band took its name.
When she passed, she was in the national healthcare system, the cancer area. The people in the ward knew her because she sang. The nurses told her that someone was too ill or something, and Rita came and sang for her there when she was in the ward. So it was amazing. I and some of the San Sabina had a chance to, on the last 2 or 3 days, to go to the ward and go with her and say goodbye. But it was something that was talked with the nurses, that everyone there loved her because she sang for the people there in order to soothe.
If you want to know why fans, Sergio among them, loved Rita, just remember this picture. A rock star, herself in her very last days on earth, goes to the bed of another dying woman and sings to her, hoping to provide some warmth, some beauty and comfort. That must have been what people had felt all along when Rita sang. This paradox of the many and the one. Yes, she sang to thousands in stadiums, but on the deepest level, she serenaded you alone. Alex told me a cool story about one time when Santa Sabina was on tour in Ireland.
I mean, I won't forget when we played in Dublin. It was really amazing, Rita. When on the plane to Dublin, what was stamped on the seat was handwriting, and we were like, okay, they have handwriting here on the seats. It was the calligraphy. And Rita decided, I need to know what that is. And we were like, okay, we asked the flight attendant, and hey, what's this? And she was, oh, that's James Joyce. That's the Ulysses. And Rita was like, she couldn't believe that a country would held a writer in such high regard.
The James Joyce story came to mind because I was thinking about how at the end of her life, Rita herself was honored by Mexico in quite an astonishing way.
When Rita passed, it was a tragedy for her to pass that young. And she had, for the previous years, been the director of the choir in the Claustro de Sor Juana. Sor Juana was a poet, a very important poet in the, I don't know, century. I'm gonna be fucking missing 18th or 17th, but I have a 50-50 chance of of landing. But no, she's one of the biggest poets and writers in Mexican history. And this place, which was a church, a convent, at some point it became a university. It's now more like an educational space. And Rita was the director of the choir. So here in the Claustro Sor Juana and Sor Juana's convent, after she passed, the wake was done there, and it was the first time in centuries that the convent of Sor Juana was used for a wake. So that tells you how special Rita was. The president even tweeted that, oh, Rita passed away. It was a president, a right inclined president who Rita hated, and it was it was unreal for him to tweet that. But it was due to who she was and her importance.
One day, after Sergio had been battling cancer for a long time, Jonathan went to see him, and his coloring was better than usual. Sergio could no longer drink, so they sipped hot coffee instead of the wine they had once enjoyed together. And Jonathan said to Sergio, "Dude, you look so good." Sergio said, "Yeah, well, it's just I'm done with the treatments." At first, Jonathan thought that Sergio was sharing good news, as if he no longer needed the treatments. But Sergio clarified, saying, "No, like, I'm done. There's nothing else they can do." That was the last time they hung out. Sergio died not long after that day. I wondered about Alex's last visit with Rita.
Do you remember anything about your conversation with her of that last visit?
Well, it's like the usual. It's weird because you say hello and do like small talk when everyone knows it's the last conversation between two people that it's going to happen, and oddly you don't want to like tell like a Neil deGrasse Tyson kind of knowledge pearl or something. It's like you're doing the smallest kind of talk. How have you been? How you feeling? I was like, yeah, and you, and what are you up to? And it's like you do the smallest talk, like you don't want to mention the illness, and you don't want to mention the place where she's at. Like it's like you're having a small talk, which kind of shields from the harshness of the situation. It's like if you start doing small talk and talking about tiniest things you could be talking about, it's like, yeah, it's like what's happening right now, it isn't that important, right? So we can be talking about anything else.
What can we even say about these two figures, Rita and Sergio? Their legacies remind us of analog beauty, of the magic of the physical media, the body, real things. Rita and Sergio remind us that being there is important. Being in a certain place, at a certain time, with certain people. Strolling is better than scrolling. I think of Jonathan Manila, who came to meet me on foot. Without any prompting, he brought along in his backpack all of Sergio's books, took them out, and lovingly arrayed them on the table. I think of Alex Otaola. I met him in his studio, and before we started the interview, he was excited to show me his new way of setting up his pedal board, how he had internally routed the signal pathways to be controlled by a single switcher. After our conversation, I asked Alex about one of his recent musical projects. Rather than sending me a Spotify link or whatever, he gifted me the vinyl. When I think back on the entire experience of going to Mexico City to learn more about Rita and Sergio, of traveling there in my skin, not on Zoom, not over email, I realized that my time with people like Jonathan and Alex became an indelible education in the power of bodily presence, of making time for that. As we move deeper into an age when it will become increasingly difficult, online especially, to determine what's authentic and what's fake, I can't help but think that we'll look back for guidance to figures like Rita and Sergio, who placed their trust in the live experience, a place you go with other people to see and hear and know. I'll quote something Jonathan said to me. I would just play the audio, but he said this part in Spanish, so I'll translate it. He was talking about his time in Barcelona, hanging out with Sergio. Sergio and I, he said, we would read each other's texts and give each other feedback. That's something I remember. And what I can tell you is that Sergio was a visionary. He would read my stories, and there was this one time when I said, dude, you are so mean, because this is what he told me. He said, you know what, Jonathan? You should write for children. And at first I thought that meant he didn't like my work, but now, looking back, returning to that moment with the benefit of hindsight, I'm like, yeah, that was true. And I am writing more for children now. And he could see that. He could envision it. And that's something I really thank him for. And even us being here right now, you and me, Greg, in Mexico City, it's all because of him. It's his fault. Jonathan said that Sergio was the voice of a transitional generation. Most of Sergio's life, including his coming of age as a poet, happened before the literary world was so super online and dependent on the unreality of social media. Carolina called her memories of Sergio stamps. I can't think of a better word. According to Jonathan, in the mid to late aughts around the art scene of Mexico City, everything was about personal contact. And in a romantic way, it's as if the failing of Rita's and Sergio's physical bodies was the last defeat of a certain kind of realness, of analog, before the digital gained ascendancy. The news of Rita's illness and death spread through an email leak and posts by social media users. Users being an apt word here, suggesting our collective addiction. And somewhere out there, still alive then, there was a poet named Sergio whose own body was beginning to betray him. Sergio and Rita are gone, but they're also here. They are now our ghostly companions, and that's okay. After all, they both loved horror stories, and if they haunt us, it's with the dark beauty they're famous for. Love their work, and it'll love you back. A gift from two Abra zombies. After Rita died, Sergio wrote a poem about her, a heartfelt tribute. Although the poem does not mention this, by the time Sergio wrote it, he knew that he himself had cancer. The poem was translated into English by Annie McDermott of the UK. Before Alex Otaola and I met up in Mexico City, Alex read Sergio's poem about Rita, and it came up in conversation. I told him I was planning to publish Annie's translation in Southwest Review. Moved by this news, Alex memorably articulated the significance of the moment he and I were experiencing then and there, its manifold convergences.
I realized from reading the poem that it was something that it goes beyond what you can comprehend in terms that music starts crossing borders and getting to places that you don't ever like realize. When you set music free, you never know where it ends. For example, I have like this sensation that the people who saw us playing live are especially the people mourning, or the people, especially Rita had like this ancient music ensemble Galileo, which is mentioned in the poem, and exactly, if you saw that live, it was amazing, and you get like this feeling that okay, the people who saw the music, who you saw at the shows, those are the people who are like feeling bad and crying. But no, it's a lot of people that you don't realize that, for example, maybe he saw the band 10 years before Rita passing, but it left a mark somewhere that he might not be still going to shows, but he's still hooked up with the music. So that was most mind-blowing from getting in touch with you guys and reading this, because it's something that happened in a geographical place where I didn't think that this thing or Rita's vibe or energy resonated. And it's like this confirmation that music gets to places you don't fucking know about. It's like this little, like the plant that's growing in the crack of a pavement. It's like the seed is there and it is going to grow. And I think the proper place for a musician to the proper mindset is that you're working only on the music. Once you release it, It doesn't belongs to you, and what the music accomplishes, it shouldn't belong to you either. Because it's the only way for this kind of magic stuff to happen, that suddenly, more than 10 years after Rita passed, we're realizing that someone was so touched by it, he wrote this, it was translated by someone in London or something, it was sent to you guys, it's like, it's unbelievable for this to be happening for me at this point. I would understand if it had happened 2 years after Rita passed, okay. But for so much time to happen and see that the music still reverberates, it's unbelievable.
Carolina told me about a photograph that is very dear to her.
I also have a photo of our last trip that we were together in Mexico, in Acapulco, with the colleagues of the School of Writers. And the photo was taken by Sergio. This is a photo when I am on the beach writing, and I have this photo, and when I was writing to him, always said him that I have that photo, and all the mornings I see it and I see you. I see you, Sergio. Until today.
It's interesting that this photograph is not of Sergio, but rather by Sergio. That it's actually a photograph of Carolina. Here, as in the story of how Sergio invited Jonathan to imagine himself as a writer of children's lit, and in other anecdotes I've heard, a major reason why Sergio continues to matter so much to friends and readers is that he helps us see ourselves. His hands help us fashion our own music. He's there with us, sculpting in the dark. This came through in my conversation with Annie, the translator without whom I may never have even known about Sergio's tribute to Rita. I was deeply moved by what Annie had to say.
Sergio Loo had this amazing ability to write, to use the collective we in his writing in a way that has all the kind of personality, all the self-awareness and vulnerability and charisma and charm and all the specifics of a first-person account, but it's a collective thing, it's a we, and that's a really amazing thing that his work has. He's writing a kind of collective autobiography of life in the Mexico City counterculture, and for a reader it's amazing because you get kind of swept along for the ride and you feel like you're also kind of strutting along arm in arm through the streets of the center of Mexico City with smudged eyeliner on and a warm can of beer in your hand on the way to a metal gig somewhere, and it's so exciting and you get all the heady thrill of it. But for a translator it's quite strange, and I started feeling like maybe I was intruding on something, or maybe I was being a bit presumptuous, wanting to translate something so sort of that had such a specific group identity kind of, and because of that I sat on this translation for a long time before sending it anywhere, because I felt like maybe I was too much of an outsider to be presuming to translate it. And then it was only the last time I was in Mexico City, when I was there for a few months a couple of years ago, I really became friends with Sergio Loo's mother, Reina, and also spent time with other people who'd been his friends and been moving around in his world. And it was that made me kind of have the courage to come back to this poem afterwards and open up my draft, and I read it and I kind of thought, no, this does kind of have the life that I want it to have. It does feel alive. It does have that kind of charisma and charm that it sounds like Sergio Loo had in just absolute spades. And it did make me think, no, I really want to share this with people. And I sent it to Southwest Review thinking that this is a place that has that taste for the weird and the strange and the kind of dark goth underbelly of Latin American life, and I'm just so delighted that at what's come out of it. The fact that Southwest Review really kind of took this poem and ran with it, and ended up wanting to explore the world that came with it and making this podcast. And it feels like a really special project to have seen play out, and I'm really happy about it.
A Song for Rita by Sergio Loo, translated by Annie McDermott. Rita Guerrero's death has taken over social media like the ghost of an old song, which, without even being played, is suddenly a hit. And all the news outlets had to announce that Rita Guerrero's death on Friday the 13th, March 2011 at 10 p.m., had been announced on Facebook, on High Five, on Twitter, on blogs, in chat rooms, on MySpace, in private emails, in group emails, in text messages, and with a too familiar tone. Hey, so Rita died. And the news reports had to explain who the hell Rita Guerrero was and why Rita Guerrero's death had taken over social media in the space of a weekend, without the PR operation behind Paulina Rubio's latest bullshit. Who was Rita Guerrero? It says on Wikipedia that Rita Guerrero, Guadalajara 1964, Mexico City 2011, was the vocalist in a radical, alternative, underground Mexican band with funk, ethnic, dark wave, goth, prog leanings called Santa Sabina, which was named after the healer Maria Sabina, and arose from a student strike, a piece of experimental theater, and an actress, Rita, let down by telenovelas. And that after playing a minor role in a telenovela called Martín Garatusa, Rita Guerrero decided to record 5 studio albums and 2 live acoustic albums with Los Psicotrópicos, only under the name Santa Sabina. Yes, exactly that. I, Rita Guerrero, want to record with Santa Sabina 5 studio albums and 2 live albums, and then bring back Baroque music with a subsequent project called Ensemble Galileo, and that's that. And that Rita Guerrero's chest pains began in 2010, announcing cancer, and that breast cancer killed her a few months later. And so grief about Rita Guerrero's death took over social media, and the news by Monday was no longer Rita Guerrero's death, but how spontaneously the news of Rita Guerrero's death had spread from user to user like an exponential cancer, or a sudden mass reincarnation of all our 90s teenage selves, the ones who went to see them at the Metropolitan, the Zócalo, the Monument to the Revolution, the CCH Vallejo, the Uni Grounds, an Indigenous Rights March, Plaza Santo Domingo with that massive mosh pit, the ones who donated their kilo of rice to the Zapatistas in lieu of a ticket, who appeared out of nowhere dressed in black for the free gig that wasn't even announced, like from user to user, from fan to fan, with a badly photocopied flyer, folded and unfolded, passed around, and that was how we all found out. Hey, so Santa are playing. The goths who hollered, "Rita, baby, we love you," who instead of smuggling in bottles to the student gig because security is everyone's responsibility, got tanked up beforehand, and tanked up screamed at the top of our lungs and from the bottom of our tortured inner darkness every word to every song from their greatest album, Babel, everyone who snuck onto Facebook at work last Friday to announce Rita died in their status. Rita Guerrero's death has taken over social media like a spontaneous cancer in one breast that suddenly, lethally reaches Rita Guerrero's head to implant it with death and fill us with grief. Because now there will be no new album or reunion tour. And our youth has been very slightly buried, and because her breast cancer didn't have to be incurable. And Rita is just one of thousands of women in this country who die of it. And because to deal with the cancer, Rita Guerrero first had to deal with the national healthcare system, and crucial time was wasted. And because she herself announced on Facebook that it wasn't too serious, while her musician friends were panicking and frantically planning a fundraising concert. And because the funds they raised weren't enough for even one more year. Rita Guerrero's death has taken over social media. And if from space or cyberspace you could get an aerial shot of all the scrolling ex-teenagers who on Friday lit tiny yellow flames with our lighters and held them up, right up, then someone should photograph this constellation, this scattering of lights in the darkness of this final concert. Thank you for listening. This has been Sound Story, A Crack in the Pavement, from New Pony in affiliation with Southwest Review. It was written by me, Greg Brownderville, editor-in-chief of New Pony and executive producer and host of Sound Story. A Crack in the Pavement was produced by me and Spencer Kinney, and we teamed up to record and edit the voices. Spencer ran sound during the interviews in Mexico City and did the sound design in post-production, which includes using music and sounds of setting, many of which Spencer recorded in July of 2024 as he wandered the streets of Coyoacan. Spencer Kinney also recorded the acoustic cover of the Joy Division song, Love Will Tear Us Apart, that you can hear in the background right now. The theme music for Sound Story is Spearman 1974 by Hayden Pedigo. Special thanks to Alejandro Springall and to Jaguars in the Attic Studios in Dallas. Massive thanks also to Jonathan Minila, Alex Otaola, Julian Herbert, Carolina Hernandez, Ileana Vargas, Annie McDermott, New Pony Managing Editor Robert Ray, Associate Editor Silvia Georgina Estrada, Marketing Director Kieran Danielson, and Translator Alex Orbera. Thanks also to Steve Keene for the custom art for Sergio Loo's poem A Song for Rita in the Fall 2024 special music issue of Southwest Review, to Julie Savasky for overseeing the print design, and to James Kellaway for web services. Big thanks also to Southern Methodist University, especially to the Department of English, Provost Elizabeth Laboa, and Daniel Eady, Associate Vice President for Strategy and Operations and Chief of Staff in the Provost's office. SMU's support makes all of this possible.
Love will tear us apart.